Knack, the original PS4 exclusive, along with Killzone Shadowfall. And I personally, as a 15-year-old boy, I got Killzone Shadowfall at the PS4 release, not so much as a choice, but well, there was no Knack bundle where I live, and every PS4 came with Killzone, and I sure wasn't really down to spend $60 on the Knack. In fact, I paid $5 for this game here in 2020, as the PS5 is already out, and you know, what a good time to play a game's release title, as the console it was made for is on its way out. This isn't my first Knack game though. I must say I played and beat Knack 2 earlier this year. It was just randomly given away in a certain regions, and I just took advantage of that. So I'm not going in blind. And also something I must address, well, is the meme status of Knack. It's almost impossible not to see someone type up or shout Knack baby in a Knack video, either in the comment section or the video itself. But today I'm trying to give an honest, somewhat serious review of this game that really tried to be the PlayStation's next big mascot and failed somewhat spectacularly. First, let's get the story out of the way because, well, it's not good. It's weird because when you describe it as like this game about a war between humans and the orcs that involves energy relics, it kinda sounds like something out of World of Warcraft. But then you watch it and it's more like a kid's cartoon, and it feels written for kids. I found it very hard to believe that anyone over the age of 10 would be very engrossed by this story. It feels like they're always just walking on eggshells to make the humans not the bad guys. The characters are also very two-dimensional. They just kinda exist to ground Knack as being a savior of humanity. Knack himself isn't much of a character, falling under the umbrella of being just kinda like the Iron Giant or Baymax kind of ripoff, but it doesn't really work in the same way that it does in those other stories. Big part of it because of the writing, but also because, let's be honest, of his design. Which leads me to talk about the graphics. Knack as a character is not good looking, and at first it's easy to feel like he's function over form, you know, his looks being justified by the gameplay, but he still doesn't look good, and we know that the reason for his look can also be traced back to just kinda being a technical showpiece for the PS4. And to me, nothing pushes this harder than Knack being the most detailed and complex thing in the whole game. The rest of the game, both graphically and aesthetically, is very bland and flat. And when this game came out, it didn't look bad, mostly because it was a next-gen game. It had a lot of effects that the PS3 just couldn't put out. But now, in 2020, when those advantages are long gone, and much better games have come out, that shine this game once had just isn't there anymore, and it just isn't nice to look at. Everything is just very clean and smooth, in a lot of ways cheap looking. The best way I've found to describe it is, it looks like one of those mobile game ads where the CGI looks nothing like the game itself. Or like those kids 3D animated shows that little kids really like for some reason, where it's just a bunch of 3D assets clashing, making for some aesthetic nightmares. The only one I can think of out of the top of my head is Masha and the Bear, but if you have a younger nephew or a young sibling, you probably have seen one of these on TV. The whole aesthetic clash in this game being made worse by Knack and how much he contrasts with the environment. For example, when Knack breaks something, it turns into little pieces or particles that form Knack, but that original object looked nothing like those particles. It honestly feels like they had to do a game around this character because some higher up really liked the concept and they had only a few months to put it all together. The soundtrack suffers from this, I mean, assuming it's true, but it's not good either way. To some extent, it's not horrible, just very generic. Moving on to the gameplay, and man, this one is a bit of a mess. Knack is an action platformer, and let's get the good out of the way. He feels very responsive, his controls are tight, and they need to be for the combat especially. And that's good. Dodging, jumping, punching, even if all of these can be a bit short in range for my personal preference, they're still okay and responsive, like I said. And there is some nice enemy variety, especially as they work into the escalation of Knack himself. But that's about where it ends. For starters, the platforming is very basic. There is not a challenge, and it gets to the point of being like, why even bother with this, especially in contrast to the much harder combat. Honestly, this platforming makes Devil May Cry platforming seem hard. And the combat is somewhat infamous at this point, being surprisingly hard. And my take on it is, well, it's harder than a kid's game, but it's not really that hard. It's just designed weirdly. Let me explain. Knack himself has very low health, and he can die in a couple of hits, depending on who he is fighting, especially when he is small. And it makes sense. When you think about it, it was done to contrast with how much more powerful you are when you grow, especially when your health is depicted by how many particles you got in your body. Which sounds funny to say, but I think you get it right. The problem here is how the combat sections are segmented. Most combat segments consist of small battle arenas where you fight a certain number of enemies. The thing is, as you move between segments, the game checkpoints, but doesn't regen your health until you die. So Knack, already having a very small health bar, makes it so unless you're playing the game perfectly and never getting hit, you're going to be dying a lot, which in my opinion makes the game look harder than it actually is, especially with the checkpoints. Overall though, the combat ends up being the silver lining of this game. While not hard, being a lot more challenging than your average kids game and also much faster in pace. The game has a big focus on crowd control, having to deal usually with ranged attacks enemies and close ones at the same time. And also playing around with scalability of Knack himself, for example. As Knack grows through a level, and enemies that were big and harder suddenly become cannon fodder. And that's how most levels will work, starting with a small Knack and finishing with a big sized Knack, reaching extreme levels by the end of the game, of course. And that's pretty satisfying, but also because it's constantly resetting to its small size each level, it does eventually overstay its welcome, as it is a 10-hour game. Knack also has some special moves like projectiles and a tornado move that are very useful, but the energy bar to use them takes so long to fill up, and also if you use one of these special moves and die, the energy bar will stay empty after a checkpoint. And that really takes out the opportunities to use them. And it's a bit jarring, especially when most of these special moves are very quick. And personally, I would have much preferred weaker powers that get used more often in the game. And I guess the developers agree with this sentiment, since that this was a change made in the sequel. Also, to finish up, there is also collectibles. Some of these are pretty well hidden, but they're not very enticing, since they're very useless individually and are not particularly interesting. The idea would be you collect a whole set to get some sort of ability, but I personally got a lot of pieces but never actually completed any sets. So I can't really speak to that experience, and I don't particularly want to replay this game to get abilities to play the game again. it just isn't very enticing. And I think that's my overall opinion of this game. It's not horrible, but it's not enticing in any way. It doesn't really succeed in being a kid's game either. It feels like a tech demo turned into a game. And I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. Do I recommend it? No, but it's not like the worst thing ever. If you get it for the same price I did, I think you'll be satisfied with it. While the gameplay isn't horrible, there just isn't much here to make it enjoyable. And if you have to play Knack, then you should probably just play the sequel. It's a lot more polished, even if I think it suffers from a lot of the same aesthetic problems that this game does. And trust me, you're not missing out anything on the story. But yeah, this has been it. I think this is so far my second worst review score I've given out, which honestly makes me happy because one, it's not that low, it's a 4 out of 10, and it also means that I have not been playing a lot of bad games since I started writing reviews. So that's cool. And yeah, that has been it. I hope you can subscribe. I hope you can like. I hope you can comment. And I hope you have a good day.